2020. Roll call, please.
Councilman Sakawa?
Here.
Councilman Messeri?
Here.
Councilman Pinella? Deputy Mayor Peterson? Mayor Vargo?
Here. Can I ask everybody to please rise for the flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Adequate notice of this meeting was duly provided to the Verona Cedar Grove Times and the Star Ledger by email and published in an annual schedule of meetings, December 26, 2019, filed with the Township Clerk and posted on the public bulletin board in the municipal building lobby in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. Okay, item 2 on the agenda, approval of minutes, 2A, to consider approval of minutes of regular public meeting, January 13th, 2020. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve, Mayor.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilman Sakawa?
Yes.
Councilman Messeri?
Yes.
Mayor Vargo?
Yes. Item 3A on the agenda. Get to that. Item 3A on the agenda is to consider adoption of pending ordinance 20-852, amending Chapter 80 of the Township Code entitled Affordable Housing.
It's an ordinance repealing Chapter 80, Affordable Housing in the Township of Cedar Grove Code in its entirety and replacing the same with the chapter entitled Affordable Housing Regulations, which will address the requirements of the Fair Housing Act and the Uniform Housing Affordability Controls regarding compliance with the township's affordable housing obligations.
At this time, I'd like to open up the meeting for the public hearing on this item. Mr. DeVico?
Charles DeVico, 111 Holly Lane. Good evening, Mayor. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for coming.
I have a few, hopefully yes and no type responses to the questions I have.
We'll do our best.
Well, I know you will. The pending ordinance that is subject to vote tonight obviously goes very deep into an issue that's been very near and dear to everyone's heart in the township for a number of years. And having the opportunity to read through the resolution in its entirety, and more importantly, through the creation of the Fair Share Plan, there are a number of questions that I think will logically to be asked and presumably could be answered relatively easily. Within the Fair Share Plan, it creates what I would consider a schedule of projects that will allow the township to meet its agreed upon settlement of the 260 affordable units within the time period prescribed out through 2025. Within those 260 affordable housing units, there's several projects and methods to which it would go. My first question is, the plan itself, are we committed to all that is identified in the plan, or is the plan flexible in as much as the township has the right to substitute other projects in lieu of what is identified within the plan?
Sure. So, Mr. DeVico, I appreciate you giving me a heads up that you were coming to, and you had some questions on this. So we have Mr. Semeraro here and Mr. Tucci are going to be able to help guide us in some of these directions. Mr. Semeraro, correct me if I'm wrong, we have, if there's some questions that you may not be able to answer, we do have Affordable Housing Council that would be able to answer those questions.
Correct. And I think preliminarily, I'd like to state that this public session is for this particular ordinance. It's not for the Fair Share Plan. We've had open sessions on the Fair Share Plan. We've had open sessions with respect to the zoning ordinances that related to specific projects that we, or particular properties, rather, that were zoned to provide certain densities that we had envisioned satisfying our affordable housing obligation. So in that regard, I'm not sure that it's a relevant question, and I say that with all due respect, only because we've already passed zoning ordinances that rezone certain properties. That's not going to change, right? So that zoning is in place. And to the extent that the owner of those properties wish to develop their parcels in such a way that it will lend a vehicle by which to satisfy the fair share plan, it'll be satisfied.
Mr. Tucci?
Yes. More directly answering your question, this plan lays out the formulation of where the township will be heading up into the year 2025, when a new round of obligation will come out. These projects are designed to satisfy the court that the township has a plan in place.
Correct.
In the event that these projects don't come to fruition,
Right.
they may end up being revisited in 2025 at that point. Or if one of the developers comes back to us and says, we're not going to do this project now, I think the township still has a right to go back into a court to amend this plan, but it's going to be a big process. It's almost the same process that we went through right now, all over again, which is not likely to happen. More than likely, if these plans don't come to fruition and these projects don't get built, it'll be addressed in 2025, and that'll be addressed in the next round. I hope that somewhat answers your question.
Somewhat.
Someone answers the first question.
Well, it somewhat answers and I guess gives a raise to another question.
Okay.
Which you did touch upon. If one of the developers chose not to do something or make application, because one of the properties has yet, to my understanding, have had formal application submitted onto it, does the township have the right to find other areas to pursue in its goal to reach its affordable housing obligation in lieu of projects that may not reach its ultimate thing?
Go ahead.
Okay,
You can answer it, or I'll answer it,
it's up to you. I'll defer.
All right. The answer to your question is, there are these projects, and then there are overlay zones also within the ordinance. So, if these projects don't come to fruition by a particular developer, he may choose to sell the project off to another developer who could fulfill the obligation under this plan. Or one of the overlay zones may choose to develop, which the township would get credits under that, where that might fill in the gap
Okay,
for this deficiency.
understood.
Another thing that I'd just like to add to that is that with regard to our affordable housing plan, we're not obligated to make sure that that comes to fruition. All we are obligated to do is put into place ordinances that
Right.
provide the reasonable opportunity for development to occur.
Right, I think that's critical.
Well, then, if I may on that part.
Please.
Within the
dialogue.
ordinance that you're voting on in a couple of minutes, there is a section which I'm hoping for a little clarification to my layman's interpretation, that is inclusionary development. And inclusionary development means a development containing both affordable units and market rate units. And that the term includes, but is not necessarily limited to, new construction, conversion, and so on. My question was related to that. If I had an existing complex that has market rate units, and they were approached about converting some of those market rate units to affordable housing units, would that affordable housing units, if we were successful, or they were successful in that discussion, would those affordable housing units then fall into the overall requirements of the court-appointed or court-agreed-upon 260 units that we must get to? So I guess what I'm asking, because there's a nod of affirmative, that aside from the plan, flexibility falls within the council and to another section on here, and perhaps to item 6D, the creation and appointment of the municipal housing liaison, that there are other ways available to the township in reaching its goal of 260 units. And I would ask the council not to dismiss or allow themselves to get caught perhaps because an application may not come on one of the identified properties for development. And in lieu of facing court battles or issues in 2025 that Mr. Tucci alluded to, that we be proactive in trying to find other areas. The appeal to that would be, because I've heard routinely over the last several years where our governing body is trying to minimize the development of multifamily housing because of the strains and stress it's putting on our community, both in the way of the infrastructure and our roads and so on. By looking at an idea or a concept of the inclusionary development and conversion of market rates to affordable housing rates, those occupancy rates are the same. There's no change to your population and so on. Hence, the strain stress on the infrastructure is not the same. Now, if the council is not interested or has a second thought about, well, growth is not the worst thing either and there can be some growth, okay, that's not what I've heard, and obviously we have done things in specifically the purchase of the property from the city of Newark to try to hold onto our open space and limit the amount of development. So I would ask you to give consideration to that thought.
Mr. DeVico, if I can just address
Sure.
that comment for a moment.
Sure.
I think you know all of our positions on how we would like to keep our town, the town that we all know and love, and reduce development as much as possible. I can assure you that this topic that you're talking about approaching other units, existing units, and trying to convert them into affordable units was a very, very hot topic amongst this council. And without revealing who we reached out to, the existing developments in town, Mr. Tucci reached out to several. And there were some challenges in that you have to deed restrict it, if I'm correct. You have to buy the unit from them, so there's an amount that you have to agree to with that property owner to buy the rights to make it an affordable unit, and then it's deed restricted forever. Correct me if I'm wrong there, or for
It could be forever or for 30 years.
for 30 years.
It could be forever.
And the property owners that Mr. Tucci spoke to were not interested in doing this, and I'll leave it up to you. I think we all know where our large developments are in town, existing developments, and there was no interest in that. Am I correct there, Mr. Tucci?
That's correct, and I just would like to add one other thing. The courts and Fair Share Housing have stressed and made it perfectly clear to us, because we went through this, that you cannot deal with prospective, what potentially may happen when you have an applicant that's at your doorstep with a plan ready to go. And that's where, the council had to make that consideration with the directions from the court in Fair Share Housing, that we had somebody at the table. As a matter of fact, we had a number of people.
We had a number at the
Number of
table.
people at the table, ready to go, and this council had to make a decision and just couldn't disregard those, even if they didn't like those projects better than other prospective things that potentially may happen. So the court would rather deal with something that's definitely going to happen, and it's at the table, than something that may happen in the future.
Right.
If I might just
No,
highlight that
it's,
fact.
that's a
And
good
then
point.
finally, part of our plan did actually include the maximum amount that the court would really truly entertain. A couple of units were scattered into it.
Right.
But, but, Mr. DeVico, to answer your question, this governing body did exactly what you're asking them to do.
It was one of the,
already.
it was, Mr. DeVico, it was one of the first things that we asked, and Mr. Tucci worked pretty hard trying to get, some of those units, and no one had any interest.
Well, I guess, and again, I'm not party to the conversations, and I certainly trust Mr. Tucci's representation back to the town council, but as I've always found, everyone has a price. I don't know what that price may be, but I would venture to say that the implementation of the plan, specifically one of the properties that are so identified, is going to create a number of headaches for the township and for the residents of this town. Clearly, you are going to be prepared to see some of that. We saw some of this resistance in 2018. There was a lot that was said, petitions floated around, and so on. As a result, there was also the creation of a committee that was to be chaired by Deputy Mayor Peterson and Councilman Tonella and 3 residents that was supposed to smooth us through these waters and so on.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just interrupt for a moment. This ordinance is an ordinance that is updating our existing affordable housing ordinance to make sure that its provisions that regulate the affordable housing units that are actually constructed comply with state and federal law. With all due respect, what this gentleman's discussing is far abreast of that subject matter. We're not talking about the affordable housing plan. This ordinance doesn't deal with it. It doesn't deal with any of the particular projects. All it's dealing with are the specifications for the physical requirements of the units and the mechanisms at which we will comply with the affordable housing obligation. So I think that, certainly it's up to you, but I think that the public session, as it relates to this ordinance, is being exceeded, and it shouldn't.
Okay. Mr. DeVico, if you have any more questions, you
No,
perhaps want to hold until the end, until it's open? Not
Yes,
just
thank
on
you.
this item only?
No, I understand the point made by council, and I acknowledge that I perhaps far-reached
That's
beyond what I
okay.
said.
We enjoy you keeping us on our toes.
Well, the only thing I will say, at the end of the day, however, in a couple of minutes, there'll be a roll call, and the roll call will have 3 names. It will not bear the name of Mr. Cimarron or Mr. Tucci, even though they've provided a lot of the information. Your 3 names will be on the approval.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on this item? Seeing none, close that portion of the meeting. Do I have a motion?
Mayor, I move for the adoption of pending ordinance number 20-852 to be published in the Verona Cedar Grove Times as a passed ordinance to take effect as prescribed by law.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilman Sakala?
Yes.
Councilman Missari?
Yes.
Mayor Varga?
Yes. Item 3B on the agenda, to consider adoption of pending ordinance 20-853, amending Chapter 38 of the Township Code entitled Land Use Procedures.
An ordinance to amend the code of the Township of Cedar Grove to revise Chapter 38, Planning Board, Section 32.2, Developer Fee Regulations to comply with current state affordable housing regulations.
At this time, I'd like to open up this portion of the meeting for this item and this item only. Seeing none, I close that portion of the meeting. Do I have a motion?
Mayor, I move for the adoption of pending ordinance 20-853 to be published in the Verona Cedar Grove Times as a passed ordinance to take effect as prescribed by law.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilman Sakala?
Yes.
Councilman Missari?
Yes.
Mayor Varga?
Yes. Item 4 on the agenda, the meeting is open to residents of the township wishing to be heard on any item on the agenda. Seeing none, close that portion of the meeting. Item 5, reports of township officials. 5A, Mr. Tucci, Township Manager.
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
What I'd like to report on this evening is one of your favorite topics.
Uh-oh, I have a lot of favorite topics.
The Pompton Avenue
Okay.
reconstruction. We got a little bit more information. During the coming week, you're going to see the new overhead lights come into play. You're going to see the old stanchions taken down, so all the bagged units will be unbagged, become operational at that point. Along with those lights come a new system that has a battery backup on each of these lights, and that'll
Wow.
last for a few hours. And they also have an interconnection that we paid a couple of dollars extra for to have done so that we're able to hook up generators at each of these lights on Pompton Avenue. And when the battery backup wears out, we'll be able to run off a generator. And you say, oh, why is that beneficial to us? Because right now, when we have a catastrophe and the electricity goes out, we don't have battery backup currently.
Right.
We put police
You
officers
put police
on the corner.
officers there.
So what that's gonna do is, during an emergency, it's gonna free up all those police officers that we're gonna have backup generators to tie into. The second item I'd like to highlight, I think it was discussed at the last staff meeting, was the improvements on West Lindsley Road.
I was just going to ask about that.
Improvements on West Lindsley Road, will probably be starting within the next month.
Okay.
And that intersection, along with a couple of other minor little intersection improvements along Pompton Avenue, will be completed. The curb and sidewalk area in particular, I highlight in front of the ambulance and rescue squad, which has been messed up for quite a while now, will all be done. And we're looking at late April, early May for the start of paving. That's the tentative schedule right now. So that's where we are as far as Route 23 construction is concerning. The township engineer has been up and down Pompton Avenue. I know he was out there Thursday and Friday, just looking at the road conditions, potholes. I know there was another big pothole out in front of the ambulance and rescue squad again, that just keep redeveloping. And until the roadway's overlaid, we're gonna continue to do that. But unless we monitor it, unless you point it out, they don't come and fix it.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
Yep.
So that's my report on Route 23 and where we are with the project.
I appreciate that. I think just for the public's edification, Pompton Ave paving is high on our radar. We want to make sure that goes as smooth and as seamless as possible. We recognize that it's going to be an inconvenience for a lot of our residents and our business owners. We spoke about at the last staff meeting to make sure that we try to understand as best we can what the state is going to be doing and when, and to make sure that we have sort of all of our ducks in a row for when they do start. So that's, this is high on our radar. We want to try to make sure that it gets in and gets done as fast as possible. So, anything else, Mr. Tucci?
That's all I have this evening.
Okay, let me get back to my agenda here. Okay, Mrs. Stutz, how are you? Good morning. Good evening, jeez. No report?
No report.
All right, thank you. Mr. Semraro?
No report this evening.
All right.
Thank you.
Councilman Misery?
Thank you, Mayor. Just on my report, the Environmental Commission has been working on a few different items, and I know there's been discussions for many months about different projects and different concerns in our community. And one of the items that continues to come up is, how can we improve the removal of debris in the water, in our, in the river and waterways. So I had reached out to Mr. Tucci to investigate this and to see, what was available, what can we do. I know the Environmental Commission talked about, maybe bringing in, having DPW go in and actually physically remove debris, but Mr. Tucci was able to research, and there's some technology that's available, and there's a pilot program that we could get involved in where there's a collection system. So I want to ask Mr. Tucci, where are we with that? Do we have any more information? Is there any good news that we could report to the council?
What I'd like to report is that, like you said, we investigated it. There is a collection system where what happens is that outflow structures, and basically where our streams enter into the Peckman River, or whether they enter into Taylor's Brook and eventually empty into the Passaic River, there are these weirs that you put in, and they have pipes with basically big collection nets. And what it does is it traps all your plastic bottles, cans, debris. And what happens is a little bit more of a maintenance issue for our township, but the township monitors these locations, goes out periodically and empties them out, and you don't get all that debris going into your waterways. I mean, if we looked at the amount of debris that ends up in our waterways And in particular, our oceans, those of you who are fishermen know that they did a lot of investigation as to what goes into the ocean. Also, did a little research, and we talk about the environment. The worst ocean polluters, I looked this up. The worst ocean polluters by country, China is number one, with 8.8 million tons per year of plastic debris going into the ocean. Number two is Indonesia with 3.2 million tons annually. The Philippines, 1.9 million tons. Vietnam, 1.8 million tons. Sri Lanka, 1.6 million tons. Egypt, 1 million tons. Thailand, 1 million tons. And then just by contrast, the United States of America, who's probably bigger than most of these countries except China, 0.3 million tons annually. So we talk about our worst ocean polluters. We got to look at the worst first. And even though our numbers are not as big, we're still working toward getting better. And how do we do that? By starting at a little town like Cedar Grove. If every little town contributes, that much less is going to go into these waterways and our ocean ways, and we'll be that much better. There's an old saying, every journey begins with a first step. Well, here's the first step. So what we're looking to do is we're going to identify with our engineering department, and we'd like the Environmental Commission to give us some input on this. We're going to identify 2 locations, and we're going to do a pilot program. I think these units cost about $6,500 a piece. They're not cheap. They're expensive, but nothing good is ever inexpensive, let's put it that way. And what we want to do is we want to monitor it and see how this works. And if it does work, we're going to try to expand it with the governing body's blessing. So that's what I have for this evening, Mr. Messeri.
Thank you. I appreciate your hard work on that, Mr. Tucci. I know that it's been a hot topic, especially since the last flooding, back in August of 2018 now, right? There's been a lot of discussion of what can we do, even small little things. What can we do that perhaps improve that and prevent it? And this is something that's constantly brought up. If we clean the river, if there's a way, to make it easier for the flow of the water, that we won't have those types of situations. So I'm very happy to hear that Cedar Grove is moving in this direction. Hopefully, we'll have a positive feedback from the 2 units that we're going to implement, and we'll see where it goes from there. So
And the whole theory is, don't wait till the debris gets into the waterway. and
Right,
have to
catch it
clean
before it
Catch
gets
it
there.
before it gets there.
Right.
It's very simplistic.
Mr. Tucci, are there any grants available
We're-
for anything like this?
We're currently looking to see what.
I feel like there should be.
Mr. Palumbo is on there's a website that you go on, Grants website.
Okay.
And he's looking to see what's available. I think it may fall under these energy grants that the governor just signed into place. So we're looking in that direction.
Okay.
The only other item I had is I wanted to just acknowledge, we had the budget meeting recently, and I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work of the town. Starting with Mr. Tucci and all the department heads, they did a tremendous job getting the budget available to us, explaining everything, having everything itemized, and being involved in many governing bodies, going all the way back to college when I managed a very small budget in college. The presentation was done very well. Everything was organized. It made I feel like my job was a lot easier. My questions were answered, and just from the material alone. So I just want to acknowledge that. I appreciate the hard work of everybody involved. So thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Scala?
Good evening, Mayor.
Good evening.
I don't have a report this evening, but I would like to welcome our Troop 65 Boy Scout, Bruce Patel, who is here monitoring our meeting for his government merit badge. So welcome him and his dad to our meeting tonight.
Welcome. That's all.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Councilman. So I have some small items. One of my first items was to complement the budget hearings as well. I think we have these budget hearings and we sit down for, total of 4 to 5 hours. And I'm not sure that many have actually seen the book that we actually look at. I'm sure some in the audience have actually taken a look at it. But there is a line item by line item for each department broken down. I mean, to the paper that they use, the cost of the copy machine, the level of detail is just impeccable. And it starts with each of the departments, and I want to thank all of them for doing that. But it always, comes from the top down, and I want to thank Mr. Tucci for putting in that time and effort. I know that's not an easy process to do it. It is a tedious process, but it is a process that is required when you want to keep our taxes where they are. And that level of detail is not lost on us, because how serious you take that is how serious we take it. And you make it easy for us to go by department by department, and then within it, you break it down within the department. So it makes our job easy. Thank you, and thank you to all of the township employees that made that budget possible.
Well, it's all the department heads and
Yeah.
the employees that work hard and put it together. Like I said, it's a process that starts in early October, and they're working on the budget probably 11 and a half months a year.
Yeah, right. And we appreciate that. The next question that I have, Mr. Tucci, is regarding the roadway audit. So I think we do this every 2 years or so. And if memory serves me correct, about 2 years ago when I got elected, we got the book. And so are we coming up close to that now?
Actually, I just talked to the town engineer.
Okay.
Last week. You should have it by, not by the 10th meeting, probably by the March 2nd meeting, you should have the updated one for the next 2 years.
Okay, that's great. And just for the public, the roadway audit is how we determine what streets get paved. So it's not just a random selection of streets. Mr. Tucci, would you mind just kind of explaining
Yeah.
how we compile that roadway
What
audit?
happens is Rutgers University developed this system many, many years ago. And what it does is it rates every roadway, not only by the roadway surface, but it rates it by drainage, curbing, if the roadway has sidewalks in it. And each of those classifications is given a numerical number. And what happens is they determine whether there's traverse cracks, longitudinal cracks in the roadway, and a lot of that goes in. They give each roadway a numerical number, and based on that numerical number, they're ranked, and that's how we pick out which roadways. Because it's very hard to say, this roadway is worse than that one without actually doing an examination. So what happens is, as the mayor said, every 2 years, we do X amount of roads every year, and every 2 years, that manual gets updated. The ones that we did go back down to the bottom because they were just completed, and the worst ones move up to the top. I think we're moving along pretty good. We normally do between 6 and 10 roadways on overlay, which is just milling off 2 inches and putting 2 inches back. And then we normally do 2 to 3 roadways on total reconstruction, which we do with state grants, NJDOT local aid grants, where we do total reconstruction, where we take out the base, the sub-base, we take out the curbing, we take out the drainage and do a total reconstruct. So those are 2 different programs that we have in town, and the roadway inventory is what guides us in them.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you for that update. Mr. Tucci, the last question that I have, in the past, we have residents over on Pilgrim Court, or Pilgrim Drive, have had concerns about, the flooding in their neighborhoods. Well, they haven't reached out to me recently. The weather's been, we haven't had that much rain. But I would like to see where we are with North Caldwell, because that was one of the things that we did promise to them, that
Right.
that we would follow up with North Caldwell. Do we have an update on where that is?
Actually, it's been a joint effort between the County of Essex and the Borough of North Caldwell. The county was following through to make sure that the soil conservation measures were taken into account, and that the county stormwater drainage plan was complied with. I know Mr. Vargas went up to North Caldwell. He did identify a couple of projects which he made them make some improvements to. And I think, I'm not saying that all the problems are solved.
Sure.
But some of the issues have been addressed and some continue to be addressed.
Okay.
Because there's some legal issues involved with
Sure.
retroactively going back and having improvements done. But we have seen some leadway made.
Okay, so we have seen some.
We have seen some.
Some improvements
Right.
made, and it's not finished yet.
Correct.
Okay, so that's good. I'm sure they'll be happy to hear that. That's all I have for my report. Okay. Item 6A on the agenda, to consider introduction of pending ordinance 20-853, amending Chapter 140 of the Township Code entitled Flood Damage Prevention.
An ordinance amending Chapter 140 of the Township Code entitled Flood Damage Prevention.
Ms. Stutz, do I open this up for public hearing now?
No.
Okay, do I have a motion?
A motion to approve, Mayor.
A second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Wait,
Oh.
can we have?
Sure, under
can I just
discussion?
give a little explanation of what this is?
Absolutely.
What this is an amendment to our existing ordinance for the township to comply with the FEMA flood insurance rate maps called FIRM maps, FIRM. And what the FIRM maps do is they identify flood zones and flood areas and flood fringe areas in your community. And you might ask, well, why is that important? It's important because based on that map and that rating is how your homeowner's insurance is rated. And that determines how much you pay for homeowner's insurance. So that, in conjunction with ISO ratings, which are insurance system ratings that come out and they rate our fire department, they rate our water system, they rate the equipment in the fire department. So all these things are very important. And what this ordinance does is it makes us compliant, it amends our existing flood ordinance to make us compliant so that the residents of this town receive the best insurance rate possible. Because when you're not in compliance, they automatically assume that you're going to have to pay the highest rate. So that's a little bit of an explanation on what this
Appreciate
is.
Any other comments? Okay, so I had a motion, I had a second. Roll call?
Councilman Sakala?
Yes.
Councilman Messeri?
Yes.
Mayor Vargo?
Yes. Item 6B on the agenda, to consider resolution concerning appropriating funds or bond for shortfall in funding for township affordable housing programs.
Be it resolved that the township does hereby agree to appropriate funds to authorize the issuance of debt to fund any shortfall in its affordable housing programs that may arise, whether due to inadequate funding from other sources or for any other reason.
Do I have a motion?
So moved, Mayor.
Second.
Any discussion?
Well, this is pretty self-explanatory. In the event that there are housing funds that are needed or available, the township has to guarantee if we don't have it in our housing trust fund, which we have probably about $500,000-600,000 right now, that the township will supply the additional funds to make sure that a project gets completed if one is proposed. Right now, we don't have anything on the table, and as we have always indicated, the township is not in the business of building affordable housing units. Our main goal has always been, when a project comes in, to make them build their obligation at their location at that time, not to take money and then the township has to go out and scout for projects. But that's what this is, just a guarantee that the township will fill in any shortfalls.
Okay, thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilman Sakala?
Yes.
Councilman Messeri?
Yes.
Mayor Vargo?
Yes. Item 6C on the agenda, to consider resolution concerning approval of affordable housing spending plan.
Be it resolved that the Township Council hereby adopts the spending plan.
Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve, Mayor.
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilman Sakala?
Yes.
Councilman Messeri?
Yes.
Mayor Vargo?
Yes. Item 6D on the agenda, to consider a resolution concerning appointment of municipal housing liaison.
Be it resolved that the Township's planner, Jason Kassler, is hereby appointed by the council to serve as the municipal housing liaison for the administration of the Township's affordable housing program.
Do I have a motion?
So moved, Mayor.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilman Sakala?
Yes.
Councilman Messeri?
Yes.
Mayor Vargo?
Yes. Item 7 on the agenda, the meeting is now open to residents of the township wishing to be heard on any item on or off the agenda concerning township business. Mr. Burns, we've missed you. How are you?
Good. Good evening. Paul Burns, 2 Elm Drive. The only thing I got, Mr. Tucci, you were talking about the Route 23. Off of Church, there's signs that states slow down, 25 mile an hour, when light is blinking. Where's the light? There's no light. How come? Do we know?
It's not there yet.
All right. 'Cause I don't see no box either. You know? Only because they have that blinking light down there, and, nobody abides by that stupid light either,
Can I
Yeah, I'm
answer you?
listening.
The answer is this. The contractor, the general contractor on the job, he's not staging his subcontractors in sequence. So what happens is, he's got the sign guy in before the actual light's in. So, and the light guys are coming now. You're seeing, like I just said earlier, the light stanchions are all being changed over, the old poles are gonna be taken out.
Okay.
So you're probably gonna see that blinking light get in there at some point.
Oh, we're all worried about the speed of everybody going through this town, especially the center of town and everything like that. Which brings me to one more item, coming out of Church. All right, Susie my wife, she brings it up all the time. When they cross that street, there's no walking sign, So the people, I'm talking about crossing Church Street.
Across Pompton?
No.
No.
Just
no,
crossing
this-
Church.
This way. Okay.
There's no sign that says walk or don't walk. A number of people, Lord, they just walk, and, you're looking to cross the line, and now that light is one car at a time, that's all you have the time for. And then somebody comes across here without the walk sign on there, they they figure they can do it, because they got the right of way, which they do, obviously. But just a point of note.
I'll look into that.
Thank you. That's it. That was easy.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Are there any other comments? Seeing none, close that portion of the meeting. Item 8, do I have a motion for an adjournment?
So moved, Mayor.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for coming.